What can I do? Well, welcome to the Vetly Speaking Podcast, your home for insightful conversations, support, and resources designed to navigate through life's challenges. I'm so glad you're here, and I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. Look, I'm really excited for my next guest as we continue on the discussion in this part two for the art of transitioning, finding purpose after service. So with me today is Mary Polanco. Mary's a fellow veteran, retired Chief Master Sergeant in our great United States Air Force, a mom, a wife, leader, author, entrepreneur, owner of Live Well and Live and Lead Well. Welcome, Mary. You are a mom, a super mom. I'm so glad to have you here on the podcast. Welcome. And for the audience out there that's listening, I mean, I could do the introduction, but tell us who's Mary. Tell us about you, your military service, what you love to do,
Yeah, thank
and
you.
what
Well,
have you been up to this now that you're retired?
now that I'm retired. Okay, well, first, thank you so much for inviting me. What an honor. I'm so grateful to be here and to be talking about this
Sure,
with everyone today.
sure.
You say, who is Mary? That I'm still working on that, actually, figuring that out. But no, I've spent the majority of my adult life in the Air Force doing a myriad of jobs. And after retirement, decided that I kind of wanted to bet on myself and see what I can do being my own boss. And so I turned a hobby of crafting into a business. So that's one of my businesses, and then my leadership development business as well. And it's just been really rewarding to have the autonomy in my schedule
Yeah,
to raise my kids as well, because I have a 15-year-old and a 11-year-old. And so real key moments here in their lives. And so I do that. Yeah. And I like to read a lot. I read a lot. I'm back in school, and I'm excited about the forever journey of learning. So that's a little bit about me.
yeah. And you
Yeah.
said, the freedom, right? Of
Mhm.
we talked a little bit about that in my part one of this series. And now obviously I spoke with Scott Stalker, and we talked a little bit more about our journey through the employment journey after military service. So it's nice to kind of have that freedom to do what you want to do, I guess, living your best life. But, so why live and lead well? You started this amazing website. I mean, I checked it out I remember very well when you started it out and you put it on LinkedIn. And so why the journey of live and lead well?
Yeah. So I have some history in teaching leadership through the Air Force's professional military education schoolhouse. And during that time, I fell in love with leadership and its concepts. So much so I got a bachelor's, master's, and now I'm working on my doctorate in those spaces. But I noticed that there was a consistent gap in leadership training that I've been exposed to and that I've seen out and about. And that is primarily that we teach a lot of leaders how to treat other people, but we rarely talk about how to treat ourselves. And so how we turn that back inward first and say, how do I create the best possible life for myself so that I'm living an inspired life, that I'm inspiring others through that, and I'm showing up for people that I'm charged with leading, and then letting that filter into our leadership theories and our leadership styles.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's called Live and Lead Well. I believe that the core of great leadership is leading self first. So
Yeah, that is it's so important, right? You hear the analogy of you don your mask on first before helping others. It's so important. You can't give of yourself, your best self to others if you don't give yourself first that grace. So that's so important. Yeah. I know in your journey of all your post-military life, what I do like that I think I discovered about you is to give yourself credit. You're a great author and you have this amazing book, and I got to show it right here, right? And this is the book right here. I love it. I love this book. I wish I read this book earlier, but
Yeah.
It's your final debrief. So I truly believe this is a book that every veteran should read before leaving the service. Very insightful, helpful in designing kind of the mindset, a shift from military to civilian life. So take us through the journey of you writing this book.
Oh my. So I was writing another book, in fact, and that one's been shelved. I was writing for about a year and then I stopped and I couldn't find the gusto in it anymore. And so about 5 months later, I was sitting in the carpool lane to pick up my kid. And I
Mhm.
thought, I share a lot online about my post-military journey, just very vulnerably and candidly. And I thought maybe if I can compile some of those ideas and thoughts into one place, it might be helpful.
Mhm.
And I wrote the outline for the book right then and there. And then 3 months later, I had a manuscript. And I'm not going to say it was easy, but I think the writing portion was probably the easiest part just because I got to get all my thoughts out on paper
Yeah.
or computer, if you will. And yeah, I mean, it was also very therapeutic for me to go through that process. I recommend, even if you don't want to write a book, I highly recommend writing
Mhm.
to kind of in your post-service journey of, or what, while you're transitioning, of just getting those thoughts and feelings out into the open for yourself. So it's very therapeutic for me. And yeah, that was my goal. And I think, you asked me about the journey, and I think it's a roller coaster of a ride
Mhm.
because there are a lot of things I had to tap back into by sharing. And so having to read and reread the book umpteen times during the process was a little exhausting at times, but really truly rewarding to see it once finished. Yeah, and what I wanted to share is, if you ever are thinking about this journey, is find that why and let it be your anchor. Because on the days
Mhm.
when you're just kind of like, why am I doing this? You go right back to that anchor, and mine was pretty strong. So
That's a very good quote. Did you journal? So how were you keeping notes? And is this something that you did prior to you leaving, or did you just start writing kind of totally after service?
I actually started writing my last year in service. Once I knew I wanted to retire, a lot of my writing was made public. And
Okay.
so I would, take to social media and be like, if I'm feeling this way, I had zero expectations, Katie, that anyone would even care what I was writing. It was
Yeah.
really for me to own
Mm.
what was true to me. And so I would put it out there. And to my surprise, I got so much feedback privately, mostly, and then a lot also like publicly. But it was really what encouraged me to write the book was the demand signal that was coming back to me of, hey, we need to talk about this a little
Yeah.
more. And so, yeah, so I started writing, I think, and then those concepts and the things that I shared helped me develop that outline for what I wanted to share in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's like I said, great book, very insightful, and I really highly recommend this book for anyone. Probably 2 years prior to you saying, "Hey, I'm going to hang up the uniform," I really like it because it does give really good insight, right? As
Sure.
to how the different emotions you go through when it's that time.
Yeah.
You might have it in your mind, right? What it would look like when you're ready to retire or even after you retire, and
Yeah.
they may not even look anything close to what you think you had in your mind. So, how did you know when it was time for you to hang up the uniform? I think I want to start there before kind of diving a little bit into the book. Okay. I do touch a little bit on the book because how did you know when you were going to hang it up?
Mhm.
Because in your book, you talk about the perpetual motion, right? The
Mhm.
traumatic years of perpetual motion. I like that term. So what does that mean? What did you mean by that?
I meant that this invisible goal line that I kept sprinting toward, that I hadn't even defined myself or for myself, that I just kept chasing and I was sprinting and the sprint, I mean, if you physically go on a track anywhere and sprint, you are exhausted quite quickly, but something that should have been a marathon, I was just running hard.
Mm.
And that perpetual state of motion was I will sit down and calm down when. And that when never came, when this season of evals was over, when this volunteer opportunity was done, when this whatever, fill in the blank, it just never came. And it was a constant go, go, go.
Yeah.
And that was glamorized. I mean, I was in a system where I was rewarded for that. So I kept doing it. And so that's what I meant by that perpetual state of motion that brought me to cognitive dysfunction, quite honestly.
Yeah. I mean, if you really, I think when you retire, I called it, for me, it was to quiet the noise. For the first time in a long time, you had to really look in the mirror because you were not selfish. You know, we've been taking care of people all our careers. What? You've been doing everything else for service. You are 24 hours, 7 days a week on call, for lack of a better way to put it, right? And you can't really hear yourself.
That's right.
And so, yeah, it's when you stop, it's almost sometimes scary because you're like, okay, wait, you're like, all right, now I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a sigh of relief. But
Yeah.
then you're like, now how do I pivot? What's next? And for me, it's literally, it was like I cleansed my palate. I could hear myself for the first time in a long time
Yeah.
and fill in the blanks with the things that I now wanted to do for myself.
Yep.
And so, yeah, you stop in motion for that moment in time. And if you do it right, and hopefully you do it right, you start to see the floodgates of creativity starting to fill in those spaces, I think, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so with that though, how do you feel like your identity change, right? Did your identity change leaving the military and having been moments where you felt lost or disconnected from your sense of self? At any moment, did you feel that?
Yeah, because I think the transition part, okay, let me clarify from my experience. Once I hit the button, I had made a huge emotional disconnect
Okay.
from the service. So that part was sort of on its way. There was other challenges that I faced during that latter portion. But when you say, was there a loss and a disconnect, that happened prior to that to get me to the point of saying, hey, I think it's time for
Interesting.
something new.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for me, it was years up to that point leading into it of feeling like, why am I so angry all the time, for one,
Uh,
at whoever, fill in the blank. Why am I so angry at leadership and, then working at the Pentagon and in Congress and just kind of getting peaks that I had not had before behind those curtains. I just felt like why this disconnect of my own, which I didn't know at the time was my own values
uh,
were different. They were changing, or maybe I was refining them from what I had been doing so long in the service. So yeah, I felt a great deal of loss because I had positioned myself based on the advice and mentorship of others to go after a certain rank and position for upwards of a decade.
uh,
And so when I got into that position, I didn't feel what I had anticipated feeling. I felt not as joyous. I
uh,
felt very confused. And that portion of it was heartbreaking for me.
wow.
And that I remember, I don't know that I share this often, but I remember the day that I sewed on Chief, feeling so different than what I thought I was going to feel.
Really
Yeah. And
interesting.
it caused me to sort of reflect on that later. Like, what was that about? I felt sort of, how sad might be the word. I felt happy because was able to achieve the thing I was told myself I could achieve.
Uh,
But there was an element of, I'll just say, feeling trapped. I felt
wow.
I now
Wow.
had 3 more years that I had to do. Now, mind you, none of this was conscious.
Right.
This was all under the surface of me then transporting those feelings into anger, depression, anxiety,
Uh,
right? So that was really what was going on underneath, is just because of self-neglect, Didi. I mean, I had spent 15 years neglecting myself, you know?
uh,
So yeah, so that's sort of that loss and that, I mean, I talk about the stages of grief in the book because they were very real to me. And that denial is what I'm describing to you. That denial piece was huge and lasted for years for me.
Wow. I mean, so come to the anger part, right? I mean, for me, I had me getting rank of chief. I remember that day. I was so happy. I was like, I made it. And I had the go, go, go. I was still on that motion, right? That you talk about. And I had a very different experience than what you did. The
Mhm.
anger from me came 2 years prior to me, obviously now retired. And my anger was towards leadership. And it's only just because, unfortunately, I don't want to, this is not necessarily finger pointing. I
Mhm.
just thought the environment and everything of what I was going through didn't match the requirement and the people that I was around with in leadership
Okay.
dealing with what I was going through at that time.
Yeah.
And so I translated that into anger, and I used that anger and I held that anger for so long that I was so exhausted that in my mind, it was like, okay, I'm now ready to leave. But I don't want it to be like I left out of anger. I didn't leave out of anger. I just, the anger took me to
And awareness.
exhaustion. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's the word. It
Yeah.
took me to exhaustion, and then I was ready. I think it
Mhm.
was like, okay, you know what? In my mind, maybe it's time for me to move on and do something else. Because the honesty is like the service will survive.
Correct.
That's what I love about it, right? None of us are here we're in service forever. There are other people that are going to step right in, and the service is going to move on and hopefully get better.
Mhm.
But yeah, that anger period, and I think I was angry also at myself.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And the anger at myself came because I was sick and I had to deal a lot with going through my rehab, going to the clinic for my appointments, and not being there for my team. I was angry at myself. I didn't control my sickness. I knew that, but in
Mhm.
the back of my head, I was still angry. And I said to myself, if I have to carry this much anger throughout, it's exhausting, it's mentally draining, it's time to go, and it's okay to go.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
gave myself the permission, it's okay to go.
On terms that maybe you had not anticipated leaving.
No.
I think me
Yeah.
neither. I never thought I would retire out of the Pentagon. Never. And so
Uh,
that was a concession that I was okay with after all was said and done because I had done so much work of forgiving myself and
yeah.
working toward enjoying, not enjoying, appreciating the journey that was. But, you bring up a really good point about the I think for a lot of people I've talked to, there's an instance likely that happens, sort of one that might be labeled unjust. Something that happens in their career where it's like an eye-opening experience of like, I'm I'm being taught that this is how it's supposed to be, but then when on the carpet or push comes to shove, this is not how leadership shows up. And it's sort of like, for me, in my instance, it was in 2017. It was really an eye opening experience of like, hey, Mary, hold on a second. What are you really sacrificing for? Like, what are you putting yourself on the back burner all the time consistently for? Not personally developing yourself, not, stepping into the person that you're meant to be when you're faced with you're really trying to stick up for the people that you're charged with leading and you're met
uh,
with nothing but resistance.
uh,
And so for me, that was a very like, hang on a second, let's look at my priorities real quick. And that sort of snowballed down into a few years later, some stuff. But yeah, I think the anger part is real and we need to deal with that. And likely, like you said, I think the end result is most almost going to be anger towards ourselves. But once we can address it, we can fix it,
yeah.
whether it be I'm angry at you because you make me angry, that phrase, like you made me mad. No, they didn't. You allowed yourself to experience that. You
Yeah.
allowed yourself to process and react that way. And ultimately, we're responsible for that. And that was a pill to swallow.
Yeah. I hear ya. But how did
Yeah.
you deal with that anger? So What were
Yeah.
some of those? Obviously, 2 years is, like I said in my example, 2 years is a long time to carry an anger, right? I
Yeah.
mean, again,
Yeah.
you get really exhausted and it's exhausting. And it's hard to wake up in the morning and feel so much resentment to go do something. God,
Yep.
there's so much energy exerted out of that, right? But how did you deal with yours? How did you deal with that process?
I was actually gifted with an emotional breakdown. So I got to the point where I had spent probably a solid year and a half, 2 years feeling manifestations of anxiety and depression. So actual physical symptoms.
Uh-huh.
And it was actually one day that was a pivotal shift for me. I came up from the balcony from the basement during telework.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't partake in my everyday ritual of crying or complaining to my husband, of having my nightly cocktail turned my medication of choice. And
Uh-huh.
I just couldn't do any of those things. I was completely numb and I was lost, to use your word. And I realized in that moment, and by the way, at this time, I was the chief of the Integrated Resilience Office for the Air Force. So that is not lost on me that I was struggling so badly and in that position. So it can happen to anyone.
And just really quickly before you
Yeah.
finish, can you tell the audience, in case someone is listening, what that division is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that division is the headquarters for the Air Force that oversees the suicide prevention program for the Department of the Air Force and other programs as well. So yeah, so that right there, I was like, well, I had in that moment, and keep in mind, none of this is really clear as it's happening, but it was sort of like a blurred two options. I didn't feel like going on anymore. And I
Uh-huh.
knew that I could make a choice to ask for help. And so I begrudgingly inside my own mind decided that I probably should reach out for help. And the irony here is I genuinely, to my core, when I would speak about reaching out for mental health help, felt and supported anyone that wanted to do it, genuinely. But when it
Uh-huh.
came to me, I was so stubborn because I couldn't figure out why I was being so weak, why I couldn't figure this out on my own. I had all the tools at my disposal. Why was nothing working? And so I was beating myself up over it at the time. And then I realized this is what we probably all feel. And that's why it's so hard to reach out. And
Uh-huh.
so, with the support of some folks I worked with, I made the call, and that's where I started my journey of just for me, medication was helpful at that time, and therapy and doing the inner work constantly every day. Giving myself grace every day. If it was just one phrase a day, didn't take up any time, just give myself grace. And that's how I dealt with it. I started to climb myself out of this hole had put myself in for years of neglect.
Yeah. I've got to echo the very important to know and let people know it is so okay, such a sign of strength to go ask for help,
Yes.
right? Because again, I also used that mechanism as you did. I remember going into therapy and literally my first session, I cried. That
Yep.
was all I did. And my therapist let me just have it. And I remember just bawling and crying, and it felt so good to
Yep.
just let it go on the couch.
Yes.
And I remember after that first session, I walked out and I was like, yeah, it's going to be such a great day. And so I was like, and I'm thinking to myself, right now, I probably look psychotic if someone saw me, but
Yep.
it felt good. And it is such a sign of strength for anyone listening out there, right? And if you don't know how to start, to ask for help and to get that help. Therapy is good. I even go as far as saying, even if when you think you have nothing to go for therapy for, and if you're in the military or post and you have that benefit, use it. You could go to a therapist and
Right.
just talk about how great your life is.
That's
It's
right.
just good to talk to someone else, right? That is neutral. But that's
Yeah.
kind of how I dealt with it too. I
Um,
went through therapy sessions, especially after what I went through. That was so traumatic for me, the anger that I felt. And for every session I went through, I found myself giving myself that forgiveness knowing that it wasn't my fault. It wasn't something that I'd asked to be sick, right? And also coming to that realization that, okay, it was okay to take the uniform off and go do something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and thank you for echoing that because that is, I speak about reaching out for help differently than I do now than I did prior to doing it myself.
Yeah.
And that's why I label it a gift. My entire emotional breakdown, my depression, it was such a gift to me. It was sort of like this window of having an entirely new vision of where I could potentially take my life. And it was a major pivot for me and I paid attention to it. And so I speak very differently about that. But we really do need to remember that our mental health is no different than our physical health.
Yeah.
And if please, if you broke your arm, you're not just going to sit there. You're going to go to an expert that says, hey, this is how we should reset this bone so that it doesn't get worse or it
Yeah.
doesn't heal incorrectly, right? Like we really need to do this. So thank you for echoing that as well and sharing your story.
Sure. And I mean, I even use the analogy of the heart, right? And it's like the heart is something you don't see, but we still go in and it's like, okay, you know what? You exercise to strengthen the heart muscle. It's the same thing. If you have the luxury of going to a to therapy, right, of any kind, especially as veterans with the benefits that we have, you go in for a checkup. It doesn't always have to get to a place where it's reactionary. It could just be even proactive if you can do it,
Yep.
just to do a checkup on how you're doing mentally and how you're coping with everyday life, right?
Yeah.
And so to pivot into that, what our families, your mom, your wife, they're
Mhm.
not exempt from what we used to feel. You're
Mm.
stressed at work, you come home, and you don't even know when you probably are maybe taking it out on them without even knowing subconsciously, or sometimes they see it outright. How did your family go through the process with you in your transition? The last couple of years in the military, or when you started to go through that anger phase,
Yeah.
and then also the transition.
Well, once I was made aware of what was going on with myself, I felt encouraged and compelled to share that with my family.
Mm.
I wanted them to understand. I mean, this was all new to me. I had never stepped onto a journey of self-discovery and healing, and I that was all new to me. But I wanted to include them in the process because I knew there were going to be not so good days. Prior to being aware
Yeah.
of what was going on with myself, I hid a little bit of that. So I would put on a smiley face. I would be checked out in reality, but I would look like I was there in front of them. And so now I had an awareness of, hey, this is what's happening and you're going to have to do a little bit of work to heal. I wanted to share that with them, and they
Yeah.
were extremely supportive. And even my kids would ask kid appropriate questions about what was going on.
Like what
And
kind of questions?
so if I would tell them, so I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety today, and that may manifest or come out as me being impatient. And so I'm going to check myself, but I also would really love to hear your feedback if maybe I said something a little too snappy or it didn't feel good. Like I want to hear those things. And
What was
so
their reaction when you asked them that?
so
When you asked them,
when I'm telling them that, I'm calm. Right? The true test is when I actually am impatient, they come back and tell me. And they did. And they would, if I were to say something, I remember one time my daughter said to me, um, uh, Mommy, why did you say it like that? It sounds like you're so angry. And I was like, okay, I'm not. Okay, am
"Oh,
I? Am I not angry? I don't know. And so with that kind of, it did. It helped me check myself. But I asked for that. And so that's the other part of this, though. You have to be patient with yourself enough to say, hey, when someone who loves you gives you the feedback that you wanted, then you need to sit with that and not attack them, you know, and not be defensive or not blame it on something else. And so, yeah, so they were good. And then they would ask me, my memory's terrible. And part of that is, well, I'm working on it. It's not terrible, but part of that is when you are in chronic stress for many, many years, like I was, or the part of your brain that records your memory called hippocampus actually stops recording because it's trying to make up for
Oh,
it in other ways. You're flooded with cortisol and all these other things are happening. And this was all new to me. I found this out about a year ago. So when during that time frame, I couldn't record memories. And the
interesting.
reason, yeah. And I can't recall things that have happened. And so that was something I took the time to explain to my kids because there's sort of like this running joke-ish in my family that mommy's memory is awful. Don't ask her about anything. But when I explained the why behind it, there was a little bit of understanding behind it,
Yeah.
which just offered an opportunity for empathy and grace for all of us. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I have memory issues, and mine is a short term memory, but that was from me being,
Oh,
the meningitis
yeah.
affected my short term memory. And just like you, my kids are like, every morning I loved it. They're like, Mom, keys, wallet. They had me do this checklist, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, thanks, guys. They were great, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it's not easy on them.
No.
They are also, I mean, I have 12-year-old twins, and we have done a very good job, I think, in letting them in the process of whatever it is that we have to go through, from when we had to do moves, or even when I was retiring. I remember my daughter, and she had a hard time with me retiring. It's
Uh,
funny, and I asked her, and I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, Mom, you know what? I remember you always used to say you wanted to be command chief, which is, for those listening, is just another layer in the chain of the promotion side, right? We can't promote past the E9 chief, but then you get this extra layers. And she always wanted to see me. She was such a champion for Mom. And so when I told her I wasn't going to be able to do that, and she was like, okay, I understand. And I'm glad you're well, you're getting better. So it's amazing what our kids absorb, right? And it's so important that we put them through in the process, or we involve them in the process. I
yep.
think it's healthy,
You
right?
know, just yesterday, real quick, yesterday, my 15-year-old daughter said to me in the car, she's sort of out of the blue, but she said, I am so glad that you decided to get well and,
Mm,
and you happen to retire.
chill.
I know. She goes, I can't imagine what my life would be like if you were disengaged during this time. Like I am fully, fully engaged.
Yeah.
And at times for a 15-year-old, that's probably, and I'm not intrusive, but I'm there. Like, let's talk about it. Let's take the extra moment to explain that. Let's go deeper there. Because when I was exhausted, that's the last thing I wanted to do. Get me from point A to point B and let me sleep.
Yeah.
And so, where it has ultimately changed our relationship. I can't even explain. It's been incredible.
No, it's so important. The relationship we have with our children, it's part of, I think, success when leaving, because uh, I mean, they literally are my motivation. They're part of my motivation. I do a lot of things because they motivate me. If you sit down and involve them, the mind that those kids have, sometimes you think they're not paying attention. They are. They're absorbing. And it's
Oh,
so important that while you're going through what it is you're going through, in each step, you ask them how they feel,
yep.
because you'll be surprised the response they give you. And that helps you, one, to, man, okay, I got to check myself. Or two, you can now maybe underline they need help. You can find out really early if it's something that they need help dealing with, and then you know how to deal with that, right?
But yeah, beautifully said. They're our most important proteges.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, looking back at your military career, right, and then the transition, is there anything you regret, or is there anything you would have done differently?
There's lots of things that I would pass on to people coming up in those phases of life, but there's
Mm,
nothing that I regret and nothing I would change.
mm,
I have,
Powerful.
and that took me a little bit to get to that declaration because of course we think about what if, but to want to change or to regret anything is disrespectful to who I am today because I wouldn't be who I am
Yeah.
without those challenges. But there are a lot, like one of the biggest things that I reason why I share what I share is because I want people as early as they feel empowered to start looking at their own life's priorities and their own life's vision. Was it written by the service of what you should be doing with your life, or are you creating your own? Like and I got asked this question one time of if I would have known what I knew back then, would I have made chief? That's a red hot
Ooh.
question. Right? And I was
I
like,
mean,
you got me in the hot seat on that one. But ultimately, as I was taken off guard and thinking about it, I thought, if I would have done the work on myself to this degree, let's say
yeah,
at 10 years or so,
yeah.
I wouldn't have made it past 12 years in service. So I can't tell you whether or not the system would have rewarded that or not. Like, I don't know. It's impossible to predict. But I will tell you, for me, gaining the kind of clarity I have now and writing my own life's vision now would have changed everything. But
Yeah. I didn't know. You still would have pursued, again, I don't know how to ask that because I can't see leaving at 12. So I always tell the people I used to mentor when I was in, you'll go through this emotion roller coaster where you're happy, you love being in, and then you hit 10 years and you're like, I'm ready to get out. And
yeah,
then it changes in 6 months and you're like, okay, you know what? I can keep going.
yeah,
And then you get to the point of no return, right?
yeah,
You're like, you go through that and it's 14 years in. And then you're like, why would you want to leave in 14 years when you could just push through to
yeah.
20?
But do you know why people do that though? Like, the reason that we keep forging forward through the tugs that keep telling us, hang on, do I want to do this?
Yeah.
The reason we keep forging forward is because we haven't done the work to find out what we actually want. What do we
Okay.
actually see our life as? Because the answer may be service. It may be military service. And then we
Yeah.
wouldn't go on these huge roller coasters of, I hate it, I love it so much. We would
Yeah.
have an awareness of, hey, this is what I'm meant to do. I'm excited to be here. And I have met a few of those people in uniform.
Yeah. But I mean, do you have to love it all the time though?
No, I
Is it
don't think
okay?
No, I don't think you have to love it all the time. But I think that when you're doing something that inspires you, you don't dread it like I did at times. Like
Yeah.
I realized there was a certain portion of this is probably at the end of my career where 90%, 85 to 90% of what I was doing was stuff I had to do and not what moved my soul.
Mm,
And the 10%,
I
let's
like
say,
that. Moved your
was
soul.
stuff. Yeah, it was stuff that the 10% was the development, the team building, the being there for people, like the leadership, that portion, right? That was the stuff. And oftentimes I had to seek it out because there wasn't enough happening in my 90% that was
Uh,
giving me that. And that's when I decided when I retire, I'm flipping that on its head. I will do no more than 5 to 10% of things that have to get done. And if I don't even want to do it, I'll outsource it. And the 90% will be all the things that make me come alive, you know?
sure. I like it.
Yeah.
Coming alive, minding your soul.
Yeah.
How would you, for people who, when they leave, because sometimes, right? I know for instance, in the National Guard, it's not like active duty because I was National Guard, where you hit your 20 or you meet the board and they're like, okay, you know what, you've got to leave. It's forced development, like we call it, and that you've hit your 20, and so you have this 12-month ticker. You've got to leave. How would you advise people? Because you may not have that answer, and that's okay. But how would you advise people that don't necessarily have an answer of what to do next? How do you advise them to transition?
So this is probably, we are, the people in the military are so wonderful at checking off things on the checklist. We just, I mean, if there was an Olympic sport for tell me what to do and I'll go do it,
Yes.
which makes this question extremely challenging because what I'm about to share seems too simple and also kind of difficult at the same time. And
Yeah.
that is to start, if you don't know where to start, start with 5 minutes in the morning a day
Okay.
of sitting in the silence, of allowing things to quiet, allowing things to dissipate, to let your brain go wild for a while, because that's often the response I get is, I can't shut my brain off. You can't, of course you can't, because you have been in a habit of doing that for years. But if you start there, what happens if you commit to that, what ends up happening is you start to feel a little more relaxed. And you may start to hear the things that you haven't been able to hear. You said it before, quiet the
Yeah.
noise. I actually have it on a keychain, quiet the noise.
Mm-hmm.
Is you start that process of turning down the volume of years, and it's not going to happen overnight. It took me months of just dedicating a few minutes to myself in the morning and not putting my pressure on myself to do anything else, just to start coming back into my own body. I know that sounds weird, but I had been doing so much for other people. I had been checking boxes and taskers and all of this busy work, that was what I was used to doing. And so
Yeah.
when you give yourself an opportunity to just be, one of the best things I ever heard was, we're human beings, we're not human doings.
Oh.
Like, if you just let yourself be just a few minutes and let that turn into something else, I promise you, you'll never regret it. But also, again, very simple, but also can be challenging to do because it's counterproductive,
I
right?
know. When we were talking about when we were trying to secure the podcast episode, and you and I talked about the fact that we retired and then went to work for a little while, right? And then you find yourself, you're like, okay, wait, why am I again on Monday dreading to go back to work?
That's right.
It's not you like I left work, I retired to do what I want to do, and then you realize that it's so important, just like you said. And for me, it was looking in the mirror and reintroducing myself. Hello. Hi. Hi, Didi. Nice to meet you again. So what
Yeah.
is it that you want to do today? And that I guess, and that was my way of slowly like, okay, you know what? Now I can really sit down and try to figure out what I want to do. And that's why this podcast was something I never even thought of, right? I started thinking about it 2 months after I retired.
Yeah.
And the creation just came because I spent like 5 minutes reintroducing myself to myself. Hi,
Yes.
Didi. Nice to meet you. So yeah, good point. Good point. I can't tell you. This has been, I could sit down and talk about this all day. And I know what I like is you kind of close in your book about, taking care of yourself first.
Mhm.
So to close out, how does Mary do that? And how would you advise other people to do the same? I know everyone is different. So how would you advise someone to take care of themselves? Especially since we've been doing it,
Yeah.
especially if you've done it for 20 years, taking care of other people,
Yeah.
it's not easy to do. You're always thinking about other people. How do you now say it's okay to take care of yourself first?
The first thing I would say is, ask yourself, when you start to get the feelings of, I can't do that for me, because, ask yourself the question, where does that originate? Where is this thought coming from? Is this a societal pressure? Is it a relational pressure from your spouse or significant other? Is it how you were brought up? Is it your military service? Where does it come from? Because it that feeling of, I can't do for me because I have to do for everyone else, and I feel guilty if I do something for myself, is not innate in us. That comes from someplace. And I feel like being aware of it is the first step. Right. The second part is, give yourself a chance to try it. So whatever that is for you, if it is, you really feel like you get a breath of energy when you sit out on your deck and have your coffee,
Mm,
then that is now a non-negotiable. That is the thing that you are gifting everyone else in your life with, because that's how you're starting your day.
mm.
You are going to show up for them in a way that you never have before, because you gave to yourself first. And I wish that's the thing we would talk about more, is the benefit of doing that for ourselves. We have a lot of canned quotes and a lot of canned analogies, but the actual reality is, I am better everything because
Yeah.
of it. Now, to answer your question, how I do that for myself, is I have a non-negotiable of quiet time in the morning. And that now my new morning routine is to care for our puppies, our dogs. So I get to walk them and feed them and play with them a little bit. I do 15 minutes of reading every single day. I set a timer. When the timer goes off, I put the book down. I work out 4 times a week. That's a very important part of my mental health uh, plan. And I make sure that I breathe fresh air every day at
Yeah.
some point. Sitting on the porch, walking, doesn't matter. Those things, though, have evolved over time, over 3 years of working on myself. The
Mhm.
very first moment I decided to give back to myself was just 5 to 10 minutes of me looking at a planner and putting encouraging stickers on it. Like it can be that small because when you change a trajectory
Yeah,
and look 6 months down the road, how far you've gone, right?
sure.
So yeah, that's what I want for everybody is to just give back to yourself. You're never going to regret it. It's going to pay itself in dividends and you will be amazed at how much better you feel.
Absolutely. Look, you see the background of all these bookshelves, the books in the bookshelf. If I tell you I have not read about 40% of them, we
I'm with
just bought books because I would buy a book and I would read some. Now, don't get me wrong, I read, but there's a lot of books in there. And my husband was like, oh, you know what? So now which one are you reading today? And I have them in order of how I read. And I do the same thing you do. I have non-negotiables, right? My quiet time outside an hour at least in
you.
the morning sun, not even like in the day or it's
Mhm.
got to be in the morning before 10. I have
Yeah.
to be outside and my dogs, I've got this cute mini poodles I take for long walks and that's where I come up with my creative side. And then I also have, I love it, my planner. I have
Yep.
my journal planner and I sit down and I write and I jot down my thoughts, right? That helps. And so those you find, I think it's finding what gives you your peace,
Mhm.
right? That's so important.
I need to add to that because that is so brilliant what you just said. And oftentimes I get asked this question of, well, what about audiobooks for
Yeah.
personal development, professional development? And so my opinion is right, that I wanted to share just in case anyone had that question. Those are great. What's the purpose behind what you're doing, right?
Right.
If you want to ingest a bunch of information on and you'd rather listen to that, consume that than something, some garbage media something, then that's absolutely do that. I use books because I listen to audiobooks and podcasts. I read books though 15 minutes a day because it is my practice in stopping. It's my practice in being present, in sitting down, calming my nervous system, and enjoying something that's in front of me. That's
Yeah.
my way of doing that. That's not my only way of getting in the personal development, but it is my way to quiet the noise.
Yeah.
So I just
I
wanted to share
agree.
that.
No, you're right. Why are you doing what you're doing? I mean, that should be pretty much a question you ask for anything before you do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because I think in finding your why, just like, and you're more invested in it.
Yeah.
And the chances of your success in doing whatever that thing is high, right?
Okay.
Mary, I could talk to you for hours, I mean, this has been really good for me. You just like it's why am I doing this? Twofold. One, want to share people's stories. B, have transformative discussions on a lot of topics.
Yeah.
But there's also selfish reason. It's my way of connecting and staying connected because even though I was ready to take off the uniform, I wanted to stay connected with my sister chiefs, my fellow veterans, and
Mhm.
those out there that are interested in learning about veteran issues.
Mhm.
Because you don't have to necessarily listen to our podcast to only, I think a lot of people still don't know what we go through. They think
Yeah.
they understand it, but I'm hoping that throughout this journey, this podcast, the people that have never worn the uniform or don't have family members that have, get a little insight into our world and what it is that we deal with, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So I want to thank you so much for the hour. It's amazing that an hour has gone by so quickly. And just like you said, right, you've got your non-negotiables. I definitely appreciate my time now that I'm out of the military. So thank you so much for gracing the Vetly Speaking podcast. And where can people find out more information about your amazing website? I think is a great link between self and great leadership. Where can they find your website and also access to your book?
Yes. So on my website is liveandleadwell.org. There you can find a myriad of things, one being my book release. And in that tab, you'll find multiple places that you can purchase the book. Before we go, yeah, thank you.
Great
And
book.
thank you so much for your wonderful feedback about the book. I'm so grateful for that. And thank you for what you're doing here. This is, and I just want to change one word that you said, which was you do this for selfish reasons. You do it for inspired reasons because there's nothing selfish about what you're doing. And so I thank you so much for everything and for facilitating these conversations for all of us. You're a change maker, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means a lot, especially for someone with that has, in all vulnerability. We could talk about that on a later topic, the imposter syndrome, when you don't know what you're doing. I mean, in just to be transparent, before we even came on, we're here fixing the equipment and lighting and before
Yeah.
we actually pressed record. So it's good to hear that from a fellow vet, a fellow sister. So thank you so much. And again, please stay tuned for the next episode of our Vetly Speaking podcast, where we talk all things Veterans Affairs and benefits. So until next time, thanks for listening, and please subscribe to my page for more insightful content at Vet Speak Media Inc.